Less than a year after the end of World War II, the great wartime leader of Britain, Winston Churchill, delivered this speech where he first coined the term Iron Curtain. This described the ominous post-war boundary in Europe between self-governing nations of the West and those in Eastern Europe, which had recently come under the grip of powerful Soviet Russia. From Stettin in the Baltic to Trieste in the Adriatic, an Iron Curtain has descended across the continent. Churchill's speech is considered one of the opening volleys symbolizing the beginning of the Cold War. It is also an honor, perhaps almost unique, for a private visitor to be introduced to an academic audience by the President of the United States. The United States stands at this time a pinnacle of world power. It is a solemn moment for the American democracy. For this primary power is also joined in awe of an inspiring accountability for the future. If you look around you, you must not only feel the sense of duty done, but also you must feel anxiety lest you fall below the level of achievement. Opportunity is here, clear, shining for both of our continents. To reject it or to ignore it, or to further it in any way, will bring upon us long reproaches after time. It is necessary that constancy of mind, persistency of purpose, and the grand simplicity of decision shall rule and guide the conduct of the English-speaking peoples as it did in the war. We must, and I believe we shall, prove ourselves equal to this severe requirement. Churchill, who had been defeated for re-election as Prime Minister in 1945, was invited to Westminster College in Fulton, Missouri, where he gave this speech. President Harry S. Truman joined Churchill on the platform and listened intently as he gave the speech. Churchill began by praising the United States, which he declared stood at the pinnacle of world power. It soon became clear that the primary purpose of the talk was to argue for an even closer special relationship between the United States and Great Britain. The great power was the English-speaking world, in organizing and politicizing the post-war world. We welcome Russia to her rightful place among the leading nations of the world. We welcome her flag upon the seas. Above all, we welcome constant, frequent, and growing contact between the Russian people and our own people on both sides of the Atlantic. It is my duty, however, for I am sure you wish me to state the facts as I see them to you, to place before you certain facts about the present situation in Europe. When I first bring up the Soviet Union, Churchill praised the communist state. Although his praise was short-lived, he raised his ethos by initially bringing up a positive point, followed by a counter-argument denouncing the state. Before I get to Churchill's bashing of the Soviet Union, let me refresh everyone on the current situation at the time of the speech. During the war against Hitler, Russian troops had advanced far beyond their own borders into Europe, smashing Nazi Germany from the east, while the Americans, British, and Canadians, among other allies, attacked Hitler from the west. After the war, the Russians gave no indication that they intended to withdraw and instead began installing puppet governments throughout Eastern Europe. From Stettin in the Baltic to Trieste in the Adriatic, an Iron Curtain has descended across the continent. Behind that line lie all capitals of ancient states of Central and Eastern Europe: Warsaw, Berlin, Prague, Vienna, Budapest, Belgrade, Bucharest, and Sofia. All these famous cities and populations around them lie in what we must call a Soviet sphere, and all are subject in one form or another, not only to Soviet influence, to a very high and in some cases increasing measure of control straight from Moscow. Athens alone, Greece with its immortal glories, is free to decide its future at an election under the British, American, and French observation. The Russian-dominated Polish government has been encouraged to make enormous and wrongful inroads upon Germany, and mass expulsions of millions of Germans on a scale grievous and undreamed of are now taking place. The communist parties, which are very small in these eastern states of Europe, have been raised to preeminence and power beyond their numbers and are seeking everywhere to obtain a totalitarian control. Police governments are prevailing in nearly every state, and so far, except in Czechoslovakia, there is no true democracy. In particular, Churchill warned against the expansionistic policies of the Soviet Union. In addition to the Iron Curtain that described that descended across Eastern Europe, Churchill spoke of the communist fifth columns that were operating throughout Western and Southern Europe, drawing parallels to the disastrous appeasement of Hitler prior to World War II. Churchill provided a powerful quote advising that in dealing with the Soviets, there was nothing in which they admired as much as strength, and there is nothing in which they have less respect for than military weakness. Up until the year 1933 or even 1935, Germany might have been saved from an awful fate which had overtaken, and we might have all been spared the miseries of Hitler that he let loose upon mankind. There has never been a war in history easier to prevent by the timely action in one which has desolated such great areas of the globe. It could have been prevented, in my belief, without the firing of a single shot, and Germany might be powerful, prosperous, and honored today, but no one would have listened, as we are sucked into an awful whirlpool. We surely must not let that happen again. This can not only be achieved by reaching now, in 1946, a good understanding of all points of Russia under the general authority of the United Nations Organization, and the maintenance of good understanding throughout many peaceful years, by the world instrument supported by the whole strength of the English-speaking world and all of its connections. Truman and many other U.S. officials warmly received the speech. Although they had decided that the Soviet Union was on the bent of expansion and only a tough stance would deter the Russians, Churchill's Iron Curtain phrase immediately entered the vocabulary of the Cold War. American officials were less enthusiastic about Churchill's call for a special relationship between the United States and Great Britain. While they viewed the English as valuable allies in the Cold War, they were well aware of Britain's power was diminishing, and they had no intention of being used as pawns to help support the crumbling British Empire. In the Soviet Union, Russian leader Joseph Stalin denounced the speech as warmongering and referred to Churchill's comments about the English-speaking world as imperial racism. The British, Americans, and Russians, allies against Hitler, less than a year before the speech, were drawing battle lines of the Cold War, which his great speech provided to